for the San Mateo County Bike and Pedestrian Count. This is an event that happens every year, and I'm just going to go through a brief training, and if any questions arise as I'm talking, feel free to type in a question into the chat box, and I'll try to answer as I see them, but I'll probably just save most of them till the end because that's easier for me. Okay, so let's dive right in. So first I'm going to talk about what the Bike and Ped Count is, how to prepare for the count as a volunteer, and then also the methodology for counting. We follow a pretty standardized count methodology. And then lastly, how to submit the form. Okay, so this is the 4th year that we're participating in the National Bike and Pedestrian Documentation Project. This year it's from September 11th through 16th. So we do counts Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday of this week, and then Saturday and Sunday. And this is just a way to document the number of bikes and pedestrians that are going through intersections throughout the county. And the resulting data can be useful by planners, decision makers, consultants that are doing a bike and ped plan. It's just helpful to have this data and see the change over time and have it readily available for locations throughout the county. So as I mentioned, volunteers count at various locations throughout the county during specific time periods. So we, every year we select the count sites based on locations from the previous years, but then also recommendations from the community and from the volunteers in the previous years. Because sometimes certain count locations can see a lot of traffic and it's too much for one volunteer to handle. So in that case, we'll either assign 2 people to the intersection, which we only did that once for this year, or just drop the intersection because we don't want to overwhelm the volunteers. So this is a map of the count locations from previous years. Purple is where we counted 2016 and 2017. Yellow is 2017, and then green was 2016 only. So last year we had a lot of new count locations on the coast, and a lot of that was because Half Moon Bay was updating they were actually creating a new bike and ped plan. So we're able to leverage a lot of the outreach around that and get some more volunteers out on the coast. But yeah, you can see that the count locations are pretty dispersed throughout the county. And we try to make sure we're hitting all or at least most of the jurisdictions. So as a volunteer, you should have already received an email with your count locations and count form. I checked this morning and I think there was about 3 people I haven't emailed that just recently filled out the request to be a volunteer. So I'll get the locations to those 3 shortly, but everyone else should have received an email with the count locations and more details about how to prepare, but I'll also go over a lot of that in this presentation. If you have any questions about your locations or how to get to your locations, I think most, if not all, are accessible via public transit if you choose to use that instead of driving. But yeah, if you do have any questions, feel free to contact me and just reply to that email. Yeah, and then you'll also want to print the count form that was attached to that email. It looks like the image in the upper right-hand corner. That is important just for the day of, for actually tallying the number of bikes and pedestrians that go through the intersection. I've seen some people use the form on their phones or on a laptop, but it's from my experience, it's easier just to print it and then do it that way. We also have hard copies of this form available for pickup at my office, so at County Center in Redwood City. The address is on the second to last slide. Then we can also mail the packets if you let me know before September 5th, because I know everyone doesn't have a printer. I actually don't have a printer at home, so we're willing to make some accommodations. So day of, make sure you bring that printed count form. That's very important. Also some scratch paper if you have additional notes, or sometimes if there's a lot of pedestrians in an intersection, it's helpful just to have a separate sheet to tally on that sheet and then translate it over to the other printed count form. But most people just tally on the printed count form. And then a clipboard and writing surface, an extra pen or pencil, and then a phone for counting or for recording the 15-minute intervals that you have to count. And then it's also helpful to bring a chair to sit in. A lot of people do that. You can check out the intersection via Google Street View beforehand if you want, and get an idea of whether there's any benches in that area or where you would want to stand if you choose to stand. But a lot of people do bring a chair that they can sit on, and then some snacks, and then also make sure you're prepared for the weather. If it's going to be a sunny day or cloudy as it typically is, then just make sure you're prepared for that. On the day of, arrive 10 minutes early before your shift in order to find a comfortable location. If you do arrive later than the start date, at least if you arrive like 10 minutes past when you're supposed to start counting, please note that on your count form just so we know that you started later. And if you choose to take breaks, try and correspond the breaks with the 15-minute intervals. So maybe you'll want to like count for 30 minutes and then take a 15-minute break, then just mark that on the sheet as well. And then also remember to be safe. You are out in the public right away, and if you ever feel uncomfortable or unsafe, like maybe there's a lot of people on the sidewalk and people riding their bikes on the sidewalk, and you feel like you're obstructing traffic, just be conscious of that, and it's okay to abandon your count if you ever feel unsafe, because we want our volunteers to be safe at all times. Okay, so this is what we are counting. As I mentioned, it's primarily cyclists and then pedestrians. So I want to clarify some of the confusion we had last year around what a pedestrian is versus what is classified as other. I did some research and about like the methodology that we use for to coincide with the national methodology. And so for pedestrians, we count anyone that is walking, runners, people that are walking their bike. We count strollers as pedestrians. I think last year a lot of people counted that as other, but strollers are considered pedestrians. And then also people using assistive devices, so like wheelchairs or walkers or things of that nature. And then what falls into the other category is other like mobility devices, so like rollerblades, skateboarders, scooters, that is all other category. Electric bicycles are still considered bicycles. Okay, so let's look at these examples. So this woman who is walking her bike, she is considered a pedestrian. And this child right here, he is a cyclist. And then, hold on. And then this man skateboarding, this is considered other. And then I think, I can't really see this woman, but I think she's on some kind of scooter device, so that would also be other. This man is a pedestrian. And then this one, because this child is kind of on a bike, but it's also kind of a scooter, you can say, or kind of a stroller in a sense, you can say that that she is a pedestrian or a cyclist. So you don't stress too much over what falls into what category. Just kind of go with your gut, use these guidelines, but if you're unsure, it's okay to just guess. And then of course, this man right here is on a bicycle. So for people that are riding their bikes, you're not counting the bikes themselves, you're counting people on bikes. So this would count as 2 cyclists. And then this one would count as 5. I doubt you'll see this out in the field, but you never know. But yeah, so we're counting the number of people on bikes, not the number of bikes. And then this is also other, and the people more in the foreground are pedestrians. So for recording data, I had a lot of questions about this last year. So this is what the form looks like when you're recording data. Make sure you fill out your name, location. The location is just the intersection, the date, and then the start and end time, and the weather. For the weather, you can be pretty general, just be like sunny or fair, but it's just to note if it's like an especially cold day or it happens to be raining. And then we count in 15-minute intervals, and you're counting every leg of the intersection. So that's why each count period, because it's 2 hours, there's 8 different sections that you have to fill out, because you start in the upper left-hand one, and then after 15 minutes, you move over to the upper right-hand one and continue following that and just moving through a different quadrant every 15 minutes. And that way we can see how the traffic changes over the period of 2 hours. And I find that it's helpful to label the streets on each quadrant. You don't have to, but it's just, you have to do it on at least one, but it's helpful to do it on all of them just so you can orient yourself. So for recording the data, we are counting every pedestrian, cyclist, and other that goes through the intersection. And we're counting in the area where they're coming from. So in this example, there were 4 pedestrians that were traveling south and starting in quadrant A and then moving south. And there were 5 that were going north, and then 3 bikes that were going east, and I don't know if there's another one. Yeah. And so you're counting where the bike or pedestrian is coming from, where they're entering the intersection, essentially. Yeah, so this just shows that you're counting where they're traveling from. So if this red arrow is the path of somebody, you mark it in this section right here in quadrant A. And then, so this slide I added this year because we had some very specific questions that people encountered in the field. So we're not counting people that cut corners. So if someone doesn't enter the intersection, like say there's a gas station right here and they cut through the parking lot, we're not counting those people just because they're not using the facilities, the sidewalks and the bike lanes that are at this intersection. They're going through a parking lot or not entering the intersection. And then when someone crosses the intersection twice, so say they cross, oops, sorry about that. Say they cross here, and then they cross right here. We count this twice because they're crossing through the intersection twice. So if this was a pedestrian, we would do a mark right here in D because this is where they're coming from. And then we would do one tally in C because they also come from that after they cross the intersection. So I know that sounds a little complicated, but I promise it's once you're out in the field and once you start, you can get the hang of it easily. And also don't stress too much about whether you're like, oh, I forgot to count this one person that counted twice, that like crossed the intersection twice. It's okay if you miss a few people. Don't worry too much because I feel like this sounds a little complicated right now, but once you get out there, it's not too bad, I promise. So after you fill out those forms, make sure you print enough for every count. So if you're doing more than one count, make sure you have enough forms for each of the count periods. But after you've completed those forms and done your counts, then you can submit the completed sheets within 72 hours of your last shift. You can either drop them off at our office, the address is there in purple, or you can submit them by mail to the Office of Sustainability. That's the address. And the most popular option is to scan the forms and then email them to the Bike Ped Count SMC email. A lot of people also just take photos of the forms after they're completed, and that works too, because that's easy to send via email. So I'll follow up with the people that don't submit their forms after 72 hours to make sure that you submit your forms in a timely manner, just so I can keep track of who counted and who wasn't able to make it in the field. So if you have any questions about this count, please reach out to me at this email, bikepedcountsmc@gmail.com, or you can call 650-599-1420. That's my phone number. Yeah, and so I'm happy to take any questions right now. If you have any questions, type them into the chat box, and then I'll talk through them. So I'll give people a few minutes just to type out their questions. Okay, I see a few right here, 1 second. Okay, let's see. Okay, how do you count bicyclists making a left turn? So when you're, here, let me go back to the slides. So if a bicyclist is making a left turn, so say they start in D and then go to quadrant A up here, you still count them in quadrant D, because this is where they're coming from and they're still entering the intersection. So you want to make sure, like, even though they're not like crossing through it, they're entering the intersection by making a left-hand turn. So you count them in the quadrant that they're coming from. I hope that answers your question. Does anyone else have any questions? I don't see any. I would just like to thank everybody for volunteering, and please don't hesitate to contact me if you have any questions. Oh, I see another one just came up from Joe. How many entities perform this count across the country? That is a really good question. I am actually unsure of that. I know a lot of cities and counties in California participate. This is actually organized by, well, Also Planning, which is a consulting firm, helps organize this event. And I couldn't tell you an exact number, but there are a fair amount. And I know it used to be a little bit more popular a couple of years ago, and as bike and pedestrian counting equipment has become more affordable, cities are starting to use that. But this is still just a really great way and affordable way to get these types of counts. And also it can be more accurate than counting equipment, just because counting equipment, if someone like passes back and forth between a counter, it will count that as multiple people. So yeah, that's a good question. And yes, volunteers do rock. So thank you everybody for participating in this, and feel free to reach out with any questions. And I think I'm gonna end this now unless anyone else has questions. I don't see anything else coming through. So thank you, everybody. Thanks for joining, and I'll post this online, a recording of this webinar online shortly.